suppose you roll like that back in my place.
Alright, so I was thinking of doing a little something for the intro, like, there is a legend of one man who watched every James Bond movie ever made, and also a handful of Godzilla movies. This podcast is on the brink of destruction.
Okay, I like it.
Godzillavangelists. Did you have any? Did you have a name for this Minisode?
I just think the hook of James Bond versus Godzilla is too good to not pass, or too good to pass up on.
Who, in all seriousness, who would win that fight?
I think we have to address that in the show. Although, I mean, how does Godzilla not win that fight?
Well, but here's the thing: in how many of the Godzilla movies has Godzilla been defeated? And now, how many times has Bond been defeated? Need I say more? This is the podcast now, by the way. We're just opening with this. I already did the intro. That was a good intro. We're in.
What?
Welcome.
I was not prepared.
We roll into this like the Nerdist and WTF, where we just catch you. You don't even realize you're recording.
Oh God. Okay. Well, I mean, you're using some Trumpian logic here, where it's like, this happened, so therefore this must happen. But I mean, we have a very talented man who rarely seems to be injured, but he's still just a man. He's 6 feet tall compared to Godzilla's 150 feet or more. He doesn't have any protection against white-hot radioactive breath. I mean, it's over before it starts.
I agree, but James Bond has the strongest power of all, which is the power of writers who make it really easy for him to escape out of any situation. Which Godzilla doesn't have. Godzilla gets defeated all the time. I don't know. I don't see this the way you see it, Ryan.
I could agree that there would never be a winner, because James Bond could just keep escaping Godzilla and honestly probably avoid his attention. But if it came down to a confrontation neither of them could escape, it would be Godzilla.
No, of course. I mean, by the eyeball test. I will concede this. By the eyeball test, between a 58-year-old view to a kill-aged Roger Moore versus a giant radioactive monster, yes. No, you're absolutely right. Well, so this is as good a time as any, I guess, to introduce the Minisode, which is basically we're going to be comparing the Godzilla podcast, or I'm sorry, well, the Godzilla podcast. It is a podcast. We're comparing the Godzilla series with another long-running movie series, which is the James Bond series, which I guess we should say right off the bat, you know, this is for fans of both, because, you know, I think that if you don't know anything about, well, I take that back. This is for fans of both, or if you want to learn a little more about one or the other and aren't opposed to learning about them. I guess this podcast is for you.
That sounds about right. And we do need to admit up front, for those of you who don't know, that Sam is a huge James Bond nerd, far more than Godzilla at this point. I'm still hoping I can convince him over to my side.
My heart's open. I am ready to be convinced.
We still have about 300 more movies to go.
I knew it.
And I think your tangent about James Bond in our King Kong versus Godzilla episode got cut out. But either way, here it is through the magic of editing.
I have a little insight into the actress here. I actually have, so for the listeners at home, I am definitely a bigger fan of the James Bond series than of the Godzilla series, being that it's the only series I'm a fan of, and both Mihama and also what's her name?
Akiko Wakabayashi.
Thank you. Yes, both of them are also in a Bond film together, and I was thrilled to see them both in this because there's quite the soap opera of events that happened on 5 years later on You Only Live Twice, the Bond film they're in. So if at any point you want a little actress drama story time with me, I'm ready. I'm ready to dive in there.
Go ahead, lay it on us. What was the tension between these two women?
Well, okay, so these two actresses end up getting cast in You Only Live Twice.
What is it called?
It's called You Only Live Twice.
Oh, I thought you were saying you only live
you
you speaking gibberish. Now I hear it.
It's a Japanese film. I may not be pronouncing it right. It is probably the most racist Bond film.
Really?
And it is.
I've heard there are a lot of them.
Believe me, there are. But it is probably the one that takes the cake. And they were both cast. I think having not really been in a room in London reading anything, and basically Mihama, thank you, was cast as this spy named Akiko, or no, Aki is what her name was, who was kind of like Bond's kind of girlfriend at the beginning of the movie, who ends up being killed, and then he ends up getting married in the movie to they create this giant cover story for him where they marry him to a woman in a small Japanese village, and much to his chagrin because he's racist, and that character was going to be played by Akiko Wakabayashi.
Yep.
Nailed it. Yes. So that was that character, and basically they finally brought them in. They were cast that way, brought them in to London, and found out that Mihama did not speak very good English, and the character Aki, was not particularly, or had a lot of lines in English. So basically they said, actually, scratch that, you're out of the movie, Akiko gets this role.
Oh.
And there's legend that she threatened suicide. I don't know how true that is.
Whoa.
But there's legend of it. But regardless, they ended up giving her kind of out of pity, they gave her the other role. So they basically just swapped roles because she spoke less English, and she's actually the one who lives through the end of the movie because the character of Ahi gets like poison dropped in her mouth. But the weird thing about it is that this is a long story, but I promise you it's paying off well. The weird thing about it is that Mihama, not a big fan of switching to this other role, being the less meaty role. And not only that, but they like shit talk her throughout the movie, where when he's about to marry her, the guy who's like, all right, you're gonna marry her, she has the face of a pig. And like, just like,
what? Yeah, I didn't mean to be on my laptop. I was just looking them up. She does not have the face of a pig.
So they.
I know.
Yeah.
So
God.
And it's never addressed again. And she ends up living through the movie, at the end of the movie, and she's the one that, like, on the end, Bond is stranded with her on a boat. But, like, it's this weird thing where they switch their roles and then must have originally planned for someone else to play her or someone less beautiful than her. But basically, for this whole story of, like, drama and switching roles and, and maybe threatening suicide, for all of that, they're like, okay, we'll give you a role, but we will call you ugly for about 20 minutes of this movie. Just right off the bat, if you're wondering why we're comparing these two, other than the fact that Ryan is the world's foremost Godzilla expert, and I'm like number 4 or 5 in the world ranking of James Bond experts. Well, one thing is that there are a lot of similarities that I've found in the few minutes I've thought about this. And one is that I thought they were the 2 longest running film franchises. I was like, of course, Godzilla is probably the most movies and James Bond is probably the second most. And I was wrong. James Bond is the 3rd most because there was a low budget British comedy series called the Carry On series that had 31 films. So Godzilla's at 33, Carry On is at 31, and then James Bond is a tricky one because it's technically at 24, but there have actually been 26 movies if you count the 2 non-canon entries, and then which I guess they're like the equivalent of, I would say they're the equivalent of Planet of the Monsters, but technically that's Toho, and I guess what makes...
I would say they're the equivalent of the American Godzilla movies.
That's fair. So if you don't count the American Godzillas, then you have 30 Godzillas? Is that
31.
Right? Okay. Another similarity that I found was they are both very much responses to World War II. Like, they're 100% post-World War II series, at least at the beginning. And then I don't know, they both evolved in their different ways. Devolved or evolved, where we'll let you be the judge.
That's, you know what, that is another connection, too, because there's a strong argument for a rapid decline, if you want to phrase it that way.
Well, you know what's funny is I disagree.
I do too, but go on.
But some would say, I guess, fans of both series could say that. So I actually wanted to know, Ryan, if you were to just sum up the Godzilla, like what Godzilla is as a series, what would you call it? What would you say about it?
That's difficult because they can get pretty different, but I would say the unifying factor is they're about how the world responds to a gigantic mutated dinosaur with radioactive nuclear origins.
Yeah, I couldn't have put it better myself. And I would say similarly to, you know, that was born out of the bomb, you know, out of basically the fact that unfortunately it was the one time that there's been a nuclear strike, and that, you know, it was a country basically making a kind of almost escapism at some point, but I guess originally kind of a more sober-minded metaphor for that.
Right.
And then the Bond series, I would probably, basically, James Bond is like the most ultra competent and perfect man, is like the best way I can describe it is he's in perfect in like to a 1960s British man, right? He's certainly he's like great at everything and never needs help, and I will argue that he's basically everything. So that it's based on a series of books first by the author Ian Fleming, who also wrote Chitty Chitty.
What a character.
Oh man, he's a piece of work. It's like he had a lot of issues he was working out in these books, and one thing is that I think that James Bond is everything that he kind of wishes he was, but I think there is maybe a deeper thing there, which is that basically, you know, James Bond's perfect, everything, doesn't need help, and he's the most English person that could ever be, and I wonder if to English people at that time it was this great kind of escapism because they didn't like love the fact that they kind of needed America's help in the, you know, and this is
That's
my
true.
theory, but you know, so they're like, well, we have, you know, a British agent who does everything on his own and is excellent in almost every way, and even has kind of a recurring American counterpart who he basically always just kind of shits all over and outsmarts, named Felix Leiter.
Felix Leiter is like James Bond's janitor. He comes in to clean up after.
Basically.
It's also interesting to, as long as we're digging socio-political here, is that World War II and the years after were like the beginning of the end for the British Empire. They slowly lost all their foreign territory, or more like returned it to its rightful owners, but it was certainly something where they saw themselves like, whoa, we used to be the world's largest power and now we're not anymore. So there's something interesting about that.
There is definitely, and the thing that's interesting to watch now, and the series has gotten a lot of criticism, and for absolutely 100% good reason, is the things, kind of like the things that set it apart are the rampant misogyny throughout. The fact that basically he's a total womanizer. And again, I think some of that is what Ian Fleming wishes he could have been, as more of a ladies' man. And it's definitely what, to a white man at that time, what a ladies' man was just slapping girls on the butt willy-nilly and And basically,
right, like you don't know you want me.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
But I'll make you realize you want me, which is actually a terrifying concept. But back then, that was very acceptable.
In the movie Thunderball, which was the fourth, and still in terms of ticket sales, the most, the best, highest grossing, I guess, or most tickets sold to any Bond film to this day, at least domestically, hugely successful. He legitimately rapes a woman. Like, there's no, that is 100% what happens. It's unbelievable. But there's this weird time capsule thing to it too. And then on the other hand, they also, in terms of, there are a lot of action and adventure movie things that they did that were very groundbreaking. And they're kind of this weird, they're a weird time capsule, I guess, to watch. And I get a kick out of them with some caveats that you have to not just be like, this is okay, because you're getting into tricky territory. And actually, before moving on into more specific things, the other thing that I think is really fascinating is that, so Ian Fleming was good friends. He fought in the war. I believe he was a pilot, but I know that Roald Dahl, who is one of my favorite children's book authors, he is the best.
Great writer.
He and Ian Fleming were friends during the war, and Roald Dahl was a pilot. I think he was a more accomplished, pilot and soldier than Ian Fleming ever was. And after he ended up getting, I think his plane got shot down, he basically he worked for Winston Churchill, and he became like an informant where he lived in Washington, D.C. and gathered American intel by basically courting the wives and girlfriends of high-ranking officers in America. And
I did not know this.
This is true, and this is not like, what's the word? This is not widely accepted fact, but this is my belief that 100% Ian Fleming, James Bond is based on Roald Dahl. I shouldn't say 100%, but certainly certain aspects, that aspect where he basically sleeps his way through every movie
oh my God.
is based on Roald Dahl, who is one of the great children's authors, in my opinion.
That is crazy.
It's fascinating.
This is news to me.
Yeah,
but the way you describe your love of the series and the way you watch it is really similar to the way that I see most of the Godzilla movies. There's a handful that I enjoy on a more objective level of just as movies, but most of them I enjoy because like, what's this Godzilla adventure like, and what was the perspective on Godzilla this year, and what cast and crew was trotted out for this one. Yeah. Do you see what I'm getting at?
100, absolutely. And actually, another similar thing I think too, and usually when people ask like, why do you like these movies, is that what I love about them is that they adhere for the most part to a template where the stories are very similar. You kind of know he's gonna win. He's gonna he's gonna do, usually, again, sleep with the girlfriend of the villain at some point, and there will be some sort of big set piece, and there are always gadgets, and there's the getting the debriefed on the mission, and there's the money penny at the secretary, and then but what it's about, it becomes that the cake it was a cake made out of cake mix, and the movie's frosting is what it's all about. It's all about what you do with that cake that's almost the same cake every time.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I get a kick out of it, and you get some really inventive, amazing action sequences in some of the early ones. You get, a lot of kind of style, and also tonally, there is a full range of more serious ones. I shouldn't say very serious, but they kind of get serious at times, and super silly, straight up camp comedies, in some of the middle portion of the series.
Yes. Including one of the best bad movies I've ever made, in my opinion.
Is it A View to a Kill?
Yes.
I love A View to a Kill.
I do.
I rewatched Moonraker recently, and that is a blast. It is so great. It's so good. So I wanted to go through and talk about, basically, we've watched now 7? Let me count this.
Yes, 7 when you don't count the alternate version.
I didn't for the purposes of
That's
this
fair
exercise.
Yes.
We watched 7 Godzilla films, and I kind of wanted to talk about each of those 7 and then kind of give a comparison, and we can both weigh in on this, of what the James Bond movie counterpart to that movie is. Like, what Bond movie is the most similar to that, and why?
Sounds good to me.
So
I say as if I didn't write them down already.
you came prepared. I love this. So I guess the first, and I want to hear your opinion on this too, if you've got an answer for these.
Sure, absolutely I do.
All right, great.
And I will offer a caveat to both you and our audience,
Mm-hmm.
which is you've seen all the James Bond movies. I counted right now, and I've seen 2/3 of them.
Okay.
So I'm operating on 2/3 efficiency, but with that
That's
in mind,
enough.
Let's get into
That's
it.
enough to have a working knowledge for sure. There are an awful lot that are very similar. But okay, so let's just dive right in with the very first Godzilla then. And I'm curious what your comp would be.
Okay, my comparison was Casino Royale, because it's probably the most serious the series has ever been, in both cases. It's the most respected of each series, probably. Although I guess that's more debatable when it comes to James Bond,
Yeah.
but I think that's pretty fair to say. And it's just like it's the prestige movie for both of them. That was my comparison.
This is mind-blowing because I also chose Casino Royale. And this is crazy because, my first instinct would be to choose one of the kind of template setters of the James Bond series, because Casino Royale was basically a reboot in 2006, right?
Right.
So, but I think you're absolutely right that the first few Bond movies, I guess From Russia with Love would be the closest to, in terms of tone, where it's a little more
Right.
serious, but Casino Royale is kind of the first one, being the 21st movie that actually has something to say, which is mind-blowing. But it has a theme. It's, Bond learns something. There's kind of a more, again, I've said that the first Godzilla is very sober-minded, and there's kind of a sober-minded view where you've had this guy who drinks and has sex with women constantly and kills, and this movie basically is like, well, what if that's the case? What emotionally will that do to a character? And so basically it's his journey to becoming an emotionally detached blunt instrument,
Right. It's like it's like you said, it's basically a reboot.
Right.
So you get a new introduction to why he is this way.
But when you
And-
never got the first time,
Right. And it's not like they didn't attempt that message a few times before, but this is the first time they actually carried through and did it properly.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right
and
about that.
it is a really awesome movie. It's so good. So that it may be, I think it's my favorite. Certainly, I think, in my opinion, it's the best made Bond film.
I'll agree, best made. It's probably like number 3 for me.
All right.
2 or 3.
We have some key disagreements on what your top 2 are, but
We do,
That's all
because
good.
my top 2 are near your bottom.
they are
ones.
not. They're right dead.
Near the middle.
Just to clarify, you're talking about GoldenEye and Spy Who Loved Me?
Yes.
Okay, having rewatched them since we first debated this, they are squarely at the bottom of the top third for me. They're
Okay,
They're
that's fair
both
enough.
like in the top 10, but in kind of like the 7 to 10 range. That's where I put them. But okay, so Godzilla Raids again. I'll go first on this one.
Okay. Sure.
And this is a weird one because, again, this is the second Godzilla movie, and you'd want to choose. You'd think you'd go with an early one, but my comp is The Man with the Golden Gun, and
Okay.
and my reasoning. This is Man with the Golden Gun was the second Roger Moore film, but basically, I would, from what I've seen from Godzilla Raids again, is that you have a movie that the budget is lower. It's in that case, it's a different director, I believe, but certainly
Yes, it's
a lower budget. Certainly, they didn't quite know where the series was going, and they kind of made something that then was later reverted from, and kind of was kind of seen as a weird direction that never kind of got revisited again.
Exactly.
And in the Bond history, you had 6 Connery films and a Lazenby movie kind of in the square in the middle of the Connery Bond movies. And then Roger Moore comes along, and basically the filmmakers didn't know whether people would like a non-Sean Connery film, because On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which was the George Lazenby one, performed very poorly, and more recently people have gone and appreciated it more, but at the time it performed very poorly, and so they have Roger Moore comes along, and the budget goes way down after they got some really bloated, really over big set piece, expensive Sean Connery films. Roger Moore comes along, and they make these like low budget genre films. So they made Live and Let Die, which was half like Harlem, New York. They're like Harlem weird gangster film, and half like blaxploitation.
They were cribbing blaxploitation for some reason, which is really strange.
Well, and then The Man with the Golden Gun is the next one, which is then I argue even is really bad. I argue it's one of the worst ones. But it's also, it takes a lot of kung fu tropes and like weird like Smokey and the Bandit, like cop shows up, and basically that, I think the cheapness of that one combined with the fact that then they, with the next movie Spy Who Loved Me, they rebooted it or kind of reset back to the style of the old ones. I think that's the best comp, is Man with a Golden Gun, Godzilla Raids Again.
This is eerie. I actually wrote down the same thing and then changed it.
No way.
But I initially wrote it down for very much the same reasons, because Godzilla Raids Again, for me, is in a 4-way competition for worst of the series. And Man with the Golden Gun is my least favorite James Bond movie.
So my comp for Mothra is On Her Majesty's Secret Service, the one George Lazenby movie, it's a little. This is a little more broad, but that one, it was the first. It was the only with George Lazenby, and it's the only with the director Peter Hunt, and it's very much the most experimental one of, certainly until the Daniel Craig current era of Bond movies. It was the most experimental one. There's a lot of kind of late 60s Easy Rider inspired, like kind of fast editing and crazy camera stuff, and it looks great, but there's a lot of just kind of, it has a lot of more experimental and kind of fresh stuff. And there's also, it's kind of the first one where it basically, until the recent run, it was the first one where he actually falls in love. And I feel like, Tracy, played by Diana Rigg, is maybe the Mothra of the Bond girls. That's an apt comparison. I almost don't want to do that now, because it's better than what I came up with. That's true, because she was Bond's, like, the one woman who was his equal, like as Mothra is to Godzilla. I had From Russia with Love, just because that's like a classic era Bond that's just like totally solid, a lot of fun to watch, and completely competent and well put together. It's a very simple one for me. It's a great one too. That would be probably my second choice on comparisons. I'm curious to see where you go with King Kong versus Godzilla. I think you got to go first, because this is your favorite. Yes, this is one of the easier ones for me to figure out. For me, the comparison is The Spy Who Loved Me, because that was my first James Bond movie that I have a lot of nostalgic love for, just as I do for King Kong vs. Godzilla. They both mark a time when the series were shifting away from trying to be relatively serious to having a lot of satirical elements and comedy and fun. And both of them just have a lot of great set pieces. So yeah, for me, it's The Spy Who Loved Me. Interesting, because it's similar to my pick in one regard. However, my nerd senses want to correct you, because actually Spy Who Loved Me was kind of the return to the more, I shouldn't say serious, but certainly like the thing that the mid-era Connerys were, they were a little less silly than it had gotten. Yeah. But it's certainly on the sillier end of the spectrum overall. I can agree.
I'll bow to your
but it does it is like kind of a mix. Tonally it's a balance of being heightened and silly and also a little more grounded, which I would probably argue is King Kong as well. My comparison is Diamonds Are Forever, which is similar to yours in that it was my first Bond movie, and it is a blast. It is so good. It's one of my favorites. It is the first one. It is the first one that went full on like goofy. Absolutely. Like, you know, to that point it was Connery's last movie. You know, they have a lot of silly stuff, and it also has kind of like this fish out of water storyline where he's basically roaming around Las Vegas in the early 70s, and he's kind of out of shape at that point, and he's kind of like King Kong.
He is
drunk and out of shape.
He's several years past his prime, brought back with a lot of money.
I contend that it is actually a good movie. I think it's great. I think it's a total blast, start to finish.
I think you're in the minority on this one, but I enjoyed watching it. I did. All right, what do you got for Godzilla Monster Planet?
This one's tough, but I'm gonna say Quantum of Solace, and my reasoning is that. Actually, I have a question for you. Is is it Monster Planet or Planet of the Monsters?
It's either.
Is that the first Godzilla movie that leaves itself open to a sequel, like open to a direct sequel?
It is the first one that so directly leaves a cliffhanger.
Okay. Then I feel okay about this.
You can argue that there's ones that have come close, but that... Yeah.
Okay, great. Then I think this is a good comparison then, because Quantum of Solace was the second Daniel Craig movie after Casino Royale, 2006. This one came out in 2008, and it is the first Bond movie to even be any kind of sequel, and it happens to be a direct sequel where it picks up maybe 5 minutes after the end of Casino Royale. And what's weird is Casino Royale didn't necessarily ask to have a sequel made. It has a kind of a conclusion, but then they just picked it right up. And it also, I think, stylistically and tonally is the most non-funny of any of them. And it's partially because of the writer's strike that happened then. But I think it's a very post-Bourne. There's a lot of like super shaky camera, and again a more serious and kind of like sad approach to the whole movie. So I think by being the first kind of serialized one and those tonal and style things, I say that is the Monster Planet of the Bond movies.
I came close to you. I picked Spectre.
Yep.
Because although for different reasons, I picked Spectre because Spectre to me is the one where it's like, wow, like they're really just desperate to regain their glory here because they took so much from other popular action series and be like, we could be like them, we can.
Yes.
And it's kind of joyless and overly complicated, and that makes me think of Godzilla Monster Planet.
Wow. Well, yeah, I see it. All right, so then I guess the last one is Mothra versus Godzilla. And
yep. And I went with Goldfinger because Mothra versus first of all they came out the same year. And Mothra versus Godzilla is kind of seen as the quintessential Godzilla sequel, and Goldfinger is kind of seen as the quintessential Bond sequel. They both just took place and cemented the series identity very early on. They're both like very colorful, and when you look at both of them harder, you can see like, well, maybe there's things that other movies later on did better, but they still just hold that like top of the trophy case position.
Oof, that is hard to argue with. Yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point, and I guess for me it's similar. I went with You Only Live Twice is the Mothra versus Godzilla, because basically Goldfinger was the setter of the template, and then for the Bond series, and then You Only Live Twice it was 2 Connery films later, and it is the first one that had all of like the more specific hallmarks with the volcano lair, and the kind of even the middle stretch where there's a lot more like globe trotting in it than in Goldfinger. And it's also, to me, it's kind of a toss-up, except that You Only Live Twice also has an incredibly slow stretch kind of in the middle end, and I thought that tips it to that side for me, because Goldfinger's pretty tight throughout.
An apt comparison.
I thought your picks were on point, start to finish.
Well, thank you. Well, our argument earlier about who would win in a fight got me thinking.
Yes.
And I thought, well, what if I had to come up with a way to even the playing field between James Bond and Godzilla? And, there's been devices that have been pretty good at repelling or even destroying Godzilla, if we think of the Oxygen Destroyer. So I thought, what if Q did a special battery of anti-Godzilla gear for James Bond? And I thought we could do an improv here where you're Q and I'm Bond, coming to see the anti-Godzilla loadout.
Okay, so this is, just for the record, so this is some sort of robot suit that Bond wears to fight Godzilla?
It's whatever you want it to be. In fact, it should be multiple things, right? Because Q usually goes through like at least a couple things in every sequence.
All right. I'm in on this.
My Bond voice is not as good as your Q voice. I'm going to go for Roger Moore because that's the closest I can get. Okay. All right.
Now, see here, 007. Have a seat.
Thanks for seeing me here, Q.
Yes.
What do you got for me today to fight the big lizard?
As you can see, there's a lizard on the loose. And I have here an attaché case full of stocked to the brim with all sorts of things you might use to fight it. Him, Godzilla. However, it's not what the outside of the briefcase is, it's what's on the inside. Now, see here. Open as such. In here you'll find a pair of black pajamas. Put them on.
What, am I supposed to seduce the monster?
Not quite, but it wouldn't hurt. All right.
What do you think he likes in
Well,
bed?
he may, but what is important is that it creates a sort of force field. If you put on the nightcap, and that produces a sort of radioactive beam that will counteract that one that comes from Godzilla's face.
Don't you think it's a bit dangerous to have a radioactive device near my head?
That's why it goes in a bulletproof and radiation-proof attaché case for you to carry. All right.
Sounds fabulous.
Now, if you step inside of the attaché case, it is a hovercraft that will fly you up to Godzilla's eye level. As such, step in the box and out. I'm not going to fly it right now, 007.
Good, I was looking for some luggage for my next flight.
007.
Are you allergic to humor, Q?
Only yours, Bond. All right. Now, the last thing is if you click the gauges on either side of the case as such, it plays a sort of tune that will summon 2 tiny women, and they will help you.
How tiny are we talking?
1 foot approximately, and they can summon a larger monster, and that monster can fight with you.
Hold on, I'm not done talking about the women. The 1 foot, you say?
Yeah, 007.
Just long enough.
No, that's not. That's disgusting. I don't want to hear it. I'm very old. I'm very old, and I'm married after all. Married after all.
Married.
Yes. I wish you wouldn't get so hung up on the women, 007. What's important is that they are the key to having a Mothra on your side.
A Mothra?
Yes. She's also a woman, but she is very furry. No, she's not your type. Though you...
It's the 60s. I'm okay with this.
This briefing is over. You disgust me.
One more thing, Q.
Yes?
Do you think you could get me an oversized pair of butterfly wings?
What on earth would you use those for?
So I can dock, if you know what I mean.
Oh, try to behave.
And see. Just end on that British noise.
Yeah, at a certain point, you no longer even make words. It's just a throat noise. Well, that was something.
Now that we've brought the two series closer together, do you have any final thoughts on James Bond versus Godzilla?
As in who would actually win that battle?
Oh, no, just the concept in general.
Well, I mean, I think I have a blast with it because we're putting this into a context that I really understand. But no, I mean, there again, it's interesting to see that there are a lot of similarities, and it's interesting to see that both have lasted so long. And probably because I think when we kind of got a little psychological, a little social up at the top, I think that is why these two have lasted, perhaps the way that they have, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that they arrived at just the right time, and to various extents they've been able to adapt as time goes forward and change and be all sorts of different things that are all just somehow variations on the same formula.
Yeah. And I think for me, popping in just basically any James Bond movie is it's like a warm hug. It's like, oh, this just takes me back, and I can only imagine it's the same for you with Godzilla, and I'm trying to get there myself.
Absolutely. I think that we can reach across the aisle here and declare a temporary truce to James Bond versus Godzilla.
Does this come out before Mothra versus Godzilla? Because the truce won't last very long if it does.
I think it will.
Okay.
So this will be a short ceasefire.
All right. Well, until whenever that one comes out, then.
If you haven't yet, leave a nice comment or review wherever you like to listen. That would really help us out. That's it for this show, but we'll see you soon. In the meantime, keep spreading the word of Godzilla.